Hey, welcome to part 18 of my procedural node series in Blender. Today we're going to take a look at creating this procedural river valley. And, compared to the amount of work that you put into this, I think it really gives a great result. This is all procedurally based, and you can customize all these textures and colors and shape to a certain extent as well. So let's see how I did that. To start out, let's delete this default cube and bring in a plane. I'm going to tap into edit mode and hit either W or right click and click subdivide, and I'm going to subdivide this 30 times, just like that. Tap out of edit mode, and let's make sure we're in cycles instead of Eevee. We're going to be doing some displacement, so we need to be in cycles. Under device, I'm going to change this to GPU compute because I have a GPU, and we're going to go to the material properties tab and hit new material. I'm going to call this land, and I'm going to scroll down, and where it says settings, I'm going to click that, and where it says displacement, I'm going to change it from bump only to displacement and bump. I'm going to split my screen and change the left side to the shader editor. You can hit N and get rid of that shelf on the right here, and I'm going to bring in a texture coordinate node. Make sure we're coming out of generated. Then I'm going to bring in an RGB curves node, just like this, and place it on there. And then I'm going to bring in a displacement node and just place this right here. It automatically plugs into normal. I'm going to plug it into height instead. And then what we can do is run this right into displace right here. So if we go into rendered mode, we can see it's displaced our plane. So to control a little bit more how this is displacing our plane, I'm going to enter in a separate XYZ node and just place it right before that RGB curves node. And now we can see this is the x-axis in that red color there, and this is going along the x-axis over here. And basically, if you look at it head-on, I guess not quite head-on because we can't see it, but it's mimicking the same shape that we have in this RGB curves node. So what I can do is I can take any of these points here and just move them around and play around with this and create any shape I want. It's actually a lot of fun. What I did here is I just basically created the shape of my river valley. So I'm going to go ahead and do that here. You can do whatever you want. I'm going to just do what I did the first time as close as I can and try and get the same results I did. And there's a point here, another point here, point here, point here, point here, and a point right up there. This is pretty close to what I had originally here. You can tweak these however you want and make whatever kind of shape you have here. But you can see, because I've got it plugged into the X output of the separate XYZ, it basically just distorts that along the X axis, and none of the other axes are really disturbed. So to get some variety here, why don't we add a noise texture and see what happens along this vector line right before the separate XYZ. So you can see I plugged that in, and there's a couple issues here. First of all, it's pretty low poly, so to fix that, I'm going to go to this modifiers panel here and go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier. I'm just going to turn this up to 3. If you're having trouble, you can turn this viewport down, but I'd suggest leaving the render at least 3, maybe even higher. I'm going to leave mine at 3 for the viewport for now because it doesn't run too horribly there. So the second issue is that this noise texture has really interrupted my river valley, so I need to ease it off a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that is using a mix RGB, and just put that right after the noise texture, and then plug this generated into color 2. And now this mix is effectively a controller for how much influence this noise texture has on this RGB curves node. If I plug it all the way to the right, it has no influence. This is the exact same image we were seeing before I added this. And if we're all the way to the left, it's total influence, and it's way too much. So we need to find some kind of compromise there. This range looks kind of cool, somewhere around here. It's totally up to you. I'm going to set this at 0.65 there. So I've got some larger detail here. If I were to change the scale, let's say to a higher number, you can see that detail, there's a lot more detail. Those bumps are way smaller. I'm going to go back to 5. I want there to be smaller detail as well as this large detail. So to do that, I'm going to duplicate this noise texture and this mix RGB and just set them up like this and plug this generated into color 2 of this mix as well here. And if I change, first of all, this factor, I want not too much influence here. I want like very little influence from this noise texture. And I'm going to change this size to something pretty high. Let's say like 60. So now you can see our land has a lot more detail there. It's a lot less boring than just how it was before with just this larger noise texture here. So that's basically the whole land setup. I'm going to go ahead and start setting up for some textures here. I'm going to take this principled BDSF we had here at the beginning and just duplicate this twice. So we have 3 of those all together. And you can have 2 of those if you want as well, or even 1 of them. It doesn't really matter, but I had kind of like a rock down here and then clay and grass up top there. So I'm going to set this up. This bottom principal BDSF here is going to be my clay texture. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-Shift-T while I have that node highlighted. It's a nice shortcut. I'm going to go into my textures folder here, and I've got a nice polygon texture, the clay, ground clay there. I'm going to set that up. So select the color, the normal, and the glossiness, and just go ahead and hit Principal Texture Setup. And there we go. It's set up really quickly. I'm going to do the same for this texture here, which is going to be my grass. Hit Control-Shift-T, and I've got another polygon texture I'm going to use, which is just this ground forest 03. Select the color, the glossiness, and the normal, just like that. Principal Texture Setup. There we go. And I'm going to set one more texture here, which is this top principal BSF. It's going to be a rock texture, and I've got this nice textures.com texture here. So let's see, textures there, rock, cliff rock 3. Yeah, this one looks pretty good. I'm pretty sure this is what I used the first time. There we go. So now that I've got these 3 textures set up here, I'm going to create 2 masks to mix those textures together. And to do that, I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it here, and run the Z output of this separate XYZ into that factor there of this color ramp. And then go ahead and create a second color ramp. And I'll just place it right here for now. I'm going to run this color output from the RGB curves node into that factor on the second color ramp. And then I'm going to go ahead and bring 2 mix shaders in for preparation and mixing all of these principal BDSFs together. No, BSDF. I keep on saying BDSF, it's BSDF. Let's go ahead and plug the color output from this first color ramp into the factor of the first color ramp, and then the same thing for the second color ramp. Let's plug that into the second factor of the mix shader. I think I said color ramp here, I meant mix shader as well. So both of these color ramps are feeding into the factors of those mix shaders. Let's come over here to the first color ramp, and I'm just going to do the values I had at the beginning. You can tweak these if they don't look quite right, but we'll take a look at that in a second. The black I'm going to set at 0.5, and the white I'm going to bring down to 0.577. So I'm just going to leave them as black and white, but just change the position. Same with the second color ramp. I'm going to change the black to 0.286, and the white is going to be 0.318, just like that. So let's take a look at these color ramps. Let's see what they're doing. So this first one, yeah, so this is just my mixing of the clay and the grass, and basically we're just plugged into the Z. Not too much going on here. It's just mixing the 2 with the noise texture basically. So let's go ahead and plug, I'm going to move all this over, give us a bit more room here. We're going to go ahead and plug the grass into the top of this mix shader right here, and the clay into the bottom, just like that. I'll move this one over a tiny bit. Let's see what the second color ramp is doing, the second mask. We can see that this one here is just basically subdividing the rock and this texture here. So the white texture is going to be the mix between the clay and the grass. So if we're thinking about that, we want to plug that into the bottom socket of this guy here, because this corresponds with the white value of whatever's going into that factor. Let's go ahead and plug that in there, and the rock is going to go into that first shader slot there. Go ahead and plug that right here. And while we're at it here, let's go ahead and go over to the mapping nodes and these scales. We probably want to turn these up a little bit. I did 2 for my clay, 3 for my grass, and 10 for my rock. You can do whatever you want, but those are the settings I have there. Okay, we're pretty much done here. Let's take a look at what this shader looks like when we plug it in to everything. Yeah, there we go. It looks pretty cool. We've got some clay there, we've got some grass, and we've got this rock bottom there. So to finish this off, I'm just going to add a simple water plane here, and I'm really going to do it very minimalistically. I'm going to enter in a plane and go ahead to my materials here. Let's go ahead and call this water, and I'm going to just change this to glass and move it down to where I'm happy. That looks good. Feel free and put an HDRI in there. It'll make it look a lot better. But there you go. You got yourself a procedural river valley. I hope you're able to follow along and see what I was doing. Thanks for watching.